Grand Prix we had yesterday, and I just want to come up with some of the talking points, just talk about some of those, because I thought it was fascinating. And the first talking point is the fact that Ferrari are back, sort of. Ferrari were so fast, particularly on single lap pace throughout the weekend, and Charles Leclerc in particular was fantastic all weekend, and yet Mercedes have come away with a 1-2. So let's just think about Vettel to begin with, because we'll come to Leclerc in a minute, because he had some reliability issues which meant that he dropped down to third place. But Vettel can't say that he had had those kind of issues, and really I was incredibly disappointed in his performance, particularly spinning after Lewis had overtaken him. Really the battle was over, and to spin at that moment on the exit of the corner, the car snapped, and maybe there was a change in wind, maybe there was some kind of issue that caught him unawares, I don't know, but my suspicion is that Lewis Hamilton has very, very firmly got himself inside Sebastian Vettel's head and done a number on him, because it's not the first time we've seen this, and you know, we keep seeing Vettel making mistakes. Last year there was a mixture of Vettel's mistakes and Ferrari's errors that meant that Lewis was able to really catch them up in the second part of the season and overtake them and win by what looked like quite a comfortable margin in the end. It didn't really look like that throughout the season, because Ferrari for an awful long time were the best car. And here we are after Albert Park 2 weeks ago, here we are with a situation where Ferrari had the best car and didn't come away with the win. They had the fastest machine and they screwed up. But Vettel has to take a big responsibility in this, because ultimately he was battling there when he spun with the eventual race winner. And you know, at this level, it's those fine margins. This World Championship will, if it's as close as this, will be won by fine margins. And you know, you have to be able to beat Lewis Hamilton. You have to, or else you're not going to win the World Championship. And Lewis is just, well, we know Lewis is very difficult to beat when he's on his best days. And yesterday wasn't even his best day. So that's really problematic for Ferrari. They have to get their head around it. How long will it be before they're starting to make decisions in terms of team orders that suddenly don't favour Vettel? That's going to be really interesting, because we know that Charles Leclerc's good. What we don't yet know is just how good. But over the course of this weekend, we had some real clues, and if it wasn't for the power problems that he had, whatever they've been caused by, he would have won, and won convincingly. He made a terrible start, but after that he really came into his own, and it was fantastic to see him recover from that bad start and end up back into the lead. It's not often we see people even do that. And there's been drives like this before by people who you think are going to be future world champions. And I remember back to moments like Jacques Villeneuve's first race in Melbourne, where he was really dominant, and there was a problem with the car apparently, or maybe the Williams team has got him to just move over for Damon Hill. I think there was a problem with the car, but he was absolutely fantastic that weekend. I think back to Michael Schumacher in '92 at Barcelona. He showed real qualities, and didn't get close to winning the race, but you saw that here was a guy who's going to do stuff. Here's a guy who's going places, and Charles Leclerc will go places, but he can only go places if he's given the machinery to get there. And Ferrari have got to work out what is what is the problem here? Is it a matter of turning the engine down a little bit? And therefore, does that mean that you're giving Mercedes an advantage, but it gets you to the end of the race and you score more points? Or is it a matter of somehow working on this reliability issue so that you can have the engine up at that height? It's going to be interesting to see how that develops. I was really impressed with McLaren getting into the final phase of qualifying. I think both drivers are excellent, but Lando Norris stands out for me. Out of all of the rookie drivers, he's really standing out, and I'm a little bit surprised because last year in Formula 2 I got to the stage where I was thinking, George Russell is the future. They could both be the future, of course. But Lando Norris has been particularly impressive so far, and what was really interesting this time was that the race pace didn't disappoint, whereas it did 2 weeks ago. So McLaren have a top 10 car, and presumably that's going to be a regular thing. We will see how that develops, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if we see some podium finishes soon, and I think that would be really nice. Something I did notice, I talked about last time, one of the interesting things as a television viewer of Formula 1 is you want the TV package to be really good. I thought the directing for this, the editing of the broadcast yesterday was really poor, particularly at the beginning. There was just so much going on that we missed. It took ages for us to find out what happened with some of the yellow flags on the first lap and the barging and the bumping of various cars, and then there was just endless replays of them, sometimes very, very long into the race as well. It was an odd production yesterday. I don't know what was going on, but something was happening. But I did notice that they used the overtake graphic, which they were experimenting with over the last few months. They've been experimenting with it in private, and they used it at the Australian Grand Prix, not to very good effect. But it was particularly useful here, where they showed that Lewis had got the undercut, and they showed it quite clearly that Lewis would have the undercut if Ferrari pitted, and Ferrari duly pitted straight away. They pitted Vettel straight away, and you could see that Lewis was going to come out ahead of him. So you have to wonder, well, are they making these decisions without this knowledge? Are they thinking, well, we're going to take the hit and we'll get him back anyway? Which, there was then battles between Vettel and Lewis anyway, so maybe it wasn't such a problem. But you've got to wonder, if you see that you're going to lose a position, could you switch your strategy in some way and stay out a little bit longer, or would that just make it even worse? I suspect it would make it even worse. But what I find interesting with that is that we now know, we can now think in our own heads, what is the best strategy here. We can see that Lewis is going to get ahead. Should Ferrari have come in a lap earlier? Should they have preempted Lewis's stop, and so on and so forth? I mean, really interesting graphics, really, and they're allowing us into the world of strategy in a way that we haven't been before. And I'm glad that they're not just using that blanket approach every time somebody overtakes, because it really isn't so much. It wouldn't be so interesting if we had it every single time. What's interesting about it is it tells us is if they can pick out an interesting story to show us. That's good editing of a television broadcast, rather than giving us it all. And I think they did that well yesterday, so I was pleased by that. Renault. So the two Renaults failing on the same lap within yards of each other. What an absolute shambles, absolutely terrible marketing. And if you've been watching the Netflix series about F1, then some of the early episodes focus on Renault and their relationship with Red Bull. And I noticed that Christian Horner couldn't help but have a little dig at Renault, because Verstappen was catching the ailing Leclerc Ferrari in the closing stages and probably would have caught him and passed him before the end of the race had the safety car not come out, and obviously the race finished under the safety car conditions. And so, you know, Christian Horner making the point that even without the Renaults in the back of the Red Bull, they end up losing positions because of because of Renault failures. Quite ironic, really, and yeah, it must be really, really frustrating. But Renault is a team and an organisation that has pretty much everything in place for it to be top of the grid. It is slightly bewildering as to why they're not. You know, it can only be a matter of time, I think, and maybe it is the current engine regulations. Maybe when the engine regulations changes and Formula One resets, often what you find is that a particular engine manufacturer gets it right and everybody else is always playing catch up. And this is what we've seen with Mercedes since the current era started. Mercedes have been largely dominating, with Ferrari always playing catch up and everybody else way behind. So it might be that, but it would be nice to see them closer for sure. But reliability, you know, I think there must be so much pressure to catch up that means you're always stressing and stretching the reliability in order to do so. So whatever gains you make can be offset by the fact that you have a higher chance of wrecking the car, which is a real shame. So the rule for fastest lap didn't really pan out this time as a talking point. It looks like there's going to be a mixture of races where sometimes the fastest lap is going to be something which people are willing to go for because of the gaps that they might have to the cars behind, or maybe they're just able to push later in the stages of the race. It seemed to be quite difficult for people to maintain the lap times as the race went on in Bahrain. Leclerc got the bonus points, so you know, a little consolation prize, which is maybe what this championship will come down to, because it doesn't just have to come down to the fine margins that I talked about on the racetrack in terms of position anymore. It could come down to the fine margins of whether you got that fastest lap. So if things are close later in the season and there's just a few points between Hamilton and Leclerc, let's say, which could be really exciting going into the final few races, maybe consolation prizes will help. We will see. I suppose the last thing I want to talk about is something that I wouldn't normally talk about with regards to sport that I enjoy, because I normally watch sport purely for the enjoyment, excitement and relaxation value, but I'm also quite a political person, and Bahrain is different. Formula One visits lots of places that I don't actually like in terms of their politics, but Bahrain is different, and Bahrain is different for this very, very simple reason, that the people in Bahrain who are suffering have asked Formula One and its fans for their solidarity and support, and for that reason I give it. Bahrain is brutal. Bahrain needs to reform. Bahrain needs to stop imprisoning political activists, and Formula One needs to speak out. You know, we often hear that sports getting a contract with a country is good because it'll open things up and it might change the country. Well, Formula One can put pressure on these people. If Bahrain want a Grand Prix, then Formula One can say, well, okay, we support human rights, and that's what Formula One should do, and it's what all Formula One drivers should be saying as well. And I'll just leave it there.